Among the many things that happened in the recent 1.7 patch, a rather unassuming character was revealed to perhaps have special powers. For the 1 year or so that Zenless has been out, this individual has been there the whole time hiding in plain sight. Nobody noticed them or the power they hid, and it took a Void Hunter level special investigator to actually notice. Not only was this individual highly intelligent and capable, but was even said to be a spiritual being. I'm talking, of course, about Howl the Husky. Where did they come from? How powerful are they? And are they on the side of good or evil? That's what I want to discuss in this video. Nah, I'm just kidding. We're gonna talk about Phaethon and their wonky new eye powers. Before we dive into that though, if you want to see more Zenless Zone Zero content, do consider subscribing to the channel. In this video, I'll be covering a few things related to the Phaethon siblings, namely their new powers, their updated eyes, and the mysterious symbol we see appear. As such, I'll be talking about things that will spoil the 1.6 and 1.7 main story. So if you're not caught up yet, then consider this your obligatory spoiler warning. When we are first introduced to the Phaethon siblings, they seem pretty normal. As protagonists, they didn't seem to have any superhuman or supernatural abilities that one would expect from main characters. In fact, compared to the other Zenless characters we've met, they are relatively weaker. They have average physical abilities, little combat experience, and below average resistance to ether, which prevents them from entering hollows. This meant that the Phaethon siblings were pretty much relegated to acting as support. They would guide people in and out of hollows, acting as guides referred to as proxies. But if they can't enter the hollows without getting an allergic reaction, how could they have functioned as guides? Well, to put it simply, they have these unique eye implants that allow them to interface with a bamboo and see whatever the little robot sees. They link up and pilot the bamboo through the Hollow Deep Dive System, or HDD, and with the help of these tools, they were able to function as proxies. Now, despite this technology being rather unique, seeing as it's the only one of its kind that we know of, it still doesn't make the siblings superhuman in any way. At the end of the day, they were still just humans. As the story progressed, however, this slowly started to change. At the end of 1.4, when they confront the main antagonist, Bringer, the bad guy triggered an explosion at point-blank range, hoping to take out both siblings. Surprisingly, both Belle and Wise survived, and as the dust settled, their eyes were shown to glow blue. We never really got much of an explanation on this until 1.6, at which time more about the ocular implants were revealed by none other than the mayor of New Eridu himself. The mayor claims to be a close friend of Phaethon's teacher and explains that the HDD system is actually incomplete and thus somewhat inefficient. He mentions that this inefficiency causes the system to take up a part of the user's body capacity, which lowers the user's overall ether aptitude. This means that Phaethon's weak resistance to ether wasn't because of bad genetics, but rather because they were constantly using the HDD and their eye implants. Through an upgrade the mayor offered, the HDD became more efficient, and Phaethon's ether levels returned back to their normal levels and was now on par with your average hollow investigator. This allowed them to not only enter the hollows but easily traverse them with no ill effects. If that were all there is, then this wouldn't be a very interesting video. I mean, all they did was just upgrade their software from Windows XP to Windows 11, but from then, their powers only continued to grow. At the end of 1.7, Vivian injects herself with an ether serum in an attempt to save Phaethon. This unsurprisingly causes her to be heavily corrupted by ether. To everyone's surprise, however, Phaethon was able to completely reverse this process, something that, as far as we know, has never been done before. While it's unclear how they achieved this, in a later discussion, the mayor and Lycon suspect that Phaethon essentially manipulated etheric energy. This in itself is a rather crazy suggestion. Everything in the world of Zenless Zone Zero, from the energy that runs New Eridu to the substance that creates the ethereals, comes from ether. To be able to freely manipulate such a substance makes Phaethon extremely special, to use Lycon's own words. So suffice to say, the Phaethon siblings have gone from being rather weak to now having the potential to reach Void Hunter levels of power. To add to that, a growing repertoire of abilities isn't the only thing about them that has changed. You see, every time the siblings have used their powers, whether it's to sync up with Eos or protect themselves, their ocular implants would always activate. Each time it does, their eyes glowed blue and a circular ring appeared. What's different this time, however, is that when they saved Vivian and manipulated Ether to do so, their eyes evolved from the standard blue circles into the Eternal Mangekyo HDD Sharingan. While it still glowed the familiar blue hue, it now took on a new and rather interesting pattern. This new look could just be an updated visual design with no deeper meaning, but there is the possibility that it's a hint to so much more. Because, you see, this symbol isn't something completely new, and we have seen it somewhere before. However, let's not jump straight into the more complicated and convoluted theories, but rather start with the more simpler ideas first. As I mentioned, the simplest explanation behind the change in design and shape of Phaethon's eyes could just be an outcome of their powers evolving. A visual representation to the player that Phaethon has accessed newer and greater powers and perhaps stepped beyond the threshold of what can be considered human. When they access the HDD or shield themselves from Bringer, their eyes take on a circular shape, but when they manipulate etheric energy, it takes on a completely different shape. Perhaps the stronger or more potent the ability is, the more intricate the shape becomes, kind of like the Sharingan. As they unlock more powers, maybe their eyes will continue to change and take on different appearances depending on which powers they choose to access. However, what's interesting about this isn't so much the whole shape changing thing, but rather the appearance of the new eyes itself. You see, the pattern that their new eyes take is weirdly similar to the symbol used by the Void Hunters. While little is known about them, the Void Hunters are individuals who have sacrificed or contributed greatly to the city of New Eridu and are granted this title by the mayor. They are often considered the strongest people humanity has to offer and can single-handedly take on a hollow just by themselves. So why is it that Phaethon's eyes now appear with the symbol of the Void Hunters? Are they secretly Void Hunters themselves? Do they have comparable powers? Is this clearly copyright infringement? Well, there's a few possible answers. The first is that it might be that the symbol has a history that predates the Void Hunters themselves. The mayor and Phaethon's teacher was revealed to have been close friends in the past. Maybe this symbol holds some significance to both of them and is a holdover from the days of bygone past. Perhaps this is why the mayor used them to honor Eridu's greatest citizens, while Carol Arna used it as a symbol of her greatest work. If we view it as nothing more than a symbol or insignia, there is likely plenty of simple and benign explanations. Maybe Carol was one of the earliest Void Hunters. Maybe the mayor used it to pay respects to Carol after her supposed death. Or maybe it's just some random symbol they scribbled together one drunken night. It could even be a blatant hint that Phaethon might eventually join the ranks of the Void Hunters. Regardless, if we consider it as nothing more than a symbol, it could mean a lot of different things, each with their own interconnected histories. However, that's only true if we confine ourselves to the world and lore of Zenless Zone Zero. If we look beyond that, however, some rather interesting possibilities start to emerge. Earlier, I mentioned that the new pattern we see appear in Phaethon's eyes also seems similar to the Void Hunter insignia. While not exactly the same, it also bears some resemblance to the symbol used for the quantum element. Now, to better explain this, I have to talk about what quantum is within the context of hoyoverse games. To be honest, I don't fully understand it myself, especially when it relates to Honkai Impact, so give me some leeway here and just bear with me. Quantum is an element that appears in almost all hoyoverse games. While most of these games have standard elements like fire, ice, or lightning, there also exist more conceptual elements like quantum and imaginary. Imaginary energy is a source of energy or power that is often related to creation and is tied to the main conduit of all existence, the imaginary tree. Think of each reality or universe as a leaf upon the imaginary tree, with the tree's branches and trunk connecting all of it together. When something comes into existence, it inadvertently becomes intertwined with the imaginary tree. So within the larger plane of existence these games take place in, the imaginary element represents creation and stability. All things that exist and those that can stably hold their form are thus part of the great tree and is born of imaginary energy. On the opposite end of that spectrum is nothingness or disorder. Everything unstable would fall from the tree and into what is called the Sea of Quanta. The Sea of Quanta is essentially an ocean of primordial substance. When reality or creation breaks down, it returns to its base form, which is what makes up the Sea of Quanta. They have different names across the different games for this place, like the Void or the Abyss, while the primordial substance is also referred to as quantum energy. It's not necessarily emptiness or a void, but rather a base substance from which all things originate from. Again, I don't know how better to explain this, but the closest example I can think of is like chaos from Greek mythology or the Ginnungagap from Norse mythology, if you're familiar with those. And as I've mentioned, I'm not too familiar with the lore here, so if I said something that's wrong, feel free to correct me. Now, what has all of this got to do with Phaethon and their eyes? Well, the symbol of their new eyes is oddly similar to the symbol of the quantum element. This presents us with two interesting possibilities. The simpler explanation of the two is that it's nothing more than a simple reference to those other games. Ether energy and quantum is somewhat similar in nature, given they both represent fundamental building blocks of each game's universe. So Phaethon's quantum eyes might just be a neat little Easter egg, seeing as how it gives them the ability to manipulate the base substance of their world. The second possibility is a slightly more complicated but far more interesting idea. What if the similarity between Phaethon's eyes and the quantum element hints at the true nature of their powers? What we have seen so far could be just a glimpse into what Phaethon will eventually be able to do. Manipulating ether energy to prevent ether corruption and generating protective barriers is one thing, but what if ether truly functions like quantum energy, in that it's a universal and fundamental part of reality itself? If this were the case, and Phaethon is truly manipulating quantum energy, this could have far more terrifying implications. It would mean that they could functionally manipulate reality itself and perhaps return everything to nothingness if they so wished. Of course, they are clearly nowhere near this level of power, but if their eyes are a direct hint that what they manipulate is in fact quantum, they could far surpass Void Hunters in the near future. Plus, think about that title for a second. As I mentioned earlier, the Void Hunters are seemingly given the title due to their contributions, but the name doesn't really fit. Why call them Void Hunters of all things if their contributions are really just citywide at best? So what if the Hollows are actually tears in reality that connects or exposes the world of Zenless Zone Zero to the Sea of Quanta, and the Void Hunters are literally extra-dimensional warriors? In fact, what if they were one of the few that are actually aware of their position on the imaginary tree and actively combat Honkai to prevent the Zenless world from deletion? What I'm saying is that in the most extreme case, Phaethon's quantum eyes might actually be a hint of the larger role they have to play. Manipulating ether is really just manipulating quantum, and Phaethon may be the literal key that can lock the doors leading to the Sea of Quanta and the horrors that lie within. Admittedly though, that is a pretty tall order. I mean, two video store owners having the ability to manipulate reality itself and having to combat extra-dimensional horrors is quite the leap to make. On top of that, all this power coming from just mere eye implants makes it an even crazier idea. Nevertheless, it is still an interesting possibility, but the truth can likely be found somewhere between the extremes. Their eyes perhaps just grants them the ability to manipulate ether and nothing more. Before they become heroes of legend, however, Phaethon has to first learn to control and gain proficiency with these new abilities. With the appearance of Yi Xuan, the next arc will likely be a training arc for Phaethon. All we can do for now is just speculate on what these symbols mean and nothing more. With that, I'll end the video here. Do you think their quantum Mangekyo Sharingan hints at a larger story, or are they just really cool designs? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found the video entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.